Welcome to Revenge Blaze, the channel that tells raw, real stories of betrayal, hidden truths, and the moment people finally stop apologizing for existing. If you're new here, thank you for finding us. We specialize in family dramas that cut deep. Stories of people who were abandoned, blamed, and erased only to rise with the kind of quiet strength that changes everything. If you're already subscribed, thank you for staying. Don't go anywhere. The next story is one you won't want to miss. It's powerful, it's emotional, and it's coming right after this. So settle in, turn up the volume, and let's begin. My entire family's deadly abandonment. My name is Mackenzie Vaughn. I'm 28. I woke up from a coma in a Hartford hospital room that felt colder than anything I'd ever known. No one waiting at the door. No flowers on the sill. No chair pulled close from someone who had stayed through the night. Just the steady beep of machines tracking my heartbeat. And one single sheet of thick cream stationery on the bedside table waiting like a final judgment. The Vaughn residence crest looked down from the top. My father's handwriting beneath it, precise, slanted the same hand that once signed checks without ever meeting my eyes. Mackenzie, we've decided to stop covering your medical expenses. Your siblings agree it's time you handle things on your own. You've always been the worthless rebel. Good luck figuring it out. Robert. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I read them again. Slower, hoping the meaning would shift. It didn't. The paper shook in my hand. My chest ached not from the staples or cracked ribs, but from the cold reality of being erased. They had seen the machines keeping me alive, seen the bills piling up, and decided I wasn't worth saving. Left me here to fight alone when I could barely breathe on my own. Worthless rebel. 2 words that had shadowed me since I was old enough to speak back. Because I wouldn't join the family real estate empire. Because I chose freelance design over boardrooms and forced smiles. Because I refused to shrink into their perfect Vaughn shape. And now those words were the last thing they left me with, while I lay broken in a hospital bed. I cried, then silent, tearing sobs that hurt my raw throat and spiked the monitors. The room stayed empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like distant mockery. 28 years old, alone in a thin gown, staring at a future signed away by the people who were supposed to stand by me. After the crash, my family left me for dead, calling me a worthless rebel. I cried alone in that hospital bed until my lawyer walked in with a stranger. He smirked and said, "Your family just made a fatal mistake. They forgot who you really are." If you've ever lain in a hospital bed, ribs taped, body screaming, heartbreaking, and realized the people who should have been there chose to walk away. If you've ever felt that exact moment when love turns into calculation and you become the expense they can no longer afford, then don't move. Hit like and subscribe right now. This isn't just another family story. This is the one where the abandoned daughter stops apologizing, stops begging, and starts taking everything back. Stick around. What happens next will change the way you look at every person who ever called you too much or not enough. You're going to want every second of this. Lying there with the IV tugging at my arm and the pain meds blurring the edges, my mind drifted back to Simsbury like it always did when the present became unbearable. That house on the hill had never truly felt like home. From the outside, it was flawless gray stone walls, wrought iron gates that closed with finality, a pool shimmering blue even in winter. People driving past probably envied it. Inside, it was built on quiet rules and colder silences. My mother, Elizabeth Beth Vaughn, was the only warmth that ever broke through. She had a gentle way of making the world feel safe. On Saturday mornings, she'd set up an easel in the sunroom, her silver bracelet catching light as she guided my hand across the page. "Paint what you feel inside, Mackenzie," she'd whisper. "Not what they expect." When Dad's voice sharpened at dinner, usually about grades or your future, she'd rest her foot against mine under the table, a silent promise. You're not wrong for being you. Then came the night that changed everything. I was 12. An art showcase at school, nothing grand, just drawings taped to gym walls and parents pretending to care. Dad promised he'd pick me up at 8:30. I waited. 8:45 passed. 9. My calls went to voicemail. I dialed Mom last. She answered on the first ring. "Stay in the lobby, sweetheart. I'm coming." The rain that night was merciless sheets of water turning roads into black mirrors. She never made it. A truck hydroplaned through an intersection. The impact tore her car apart. She was gone before help arrived. Dad showed up at the hospital an hour late. I sat in a plastic chair in my school dress, fingers numb around a paper cup of water a nurse had given me. He didn't sit, didn't hold me. He just stood there and said the words that took root inside me. "Your mother drove into that storm because you called her. You did this." No comfort. No, it's not your fault. Just blame delivered like truth. From that moment, guilt became the filter I saw myself through. Every time I wanted more space, more voice, more forgiveness, I heard those words and shrank instead. A couple of years later, Victoria Hayes arrived. She moved in smoothly like she'd rehearsed the role. Within months, the house was rewritten. Mom's photos disappeared from the walls. The sunroom became an office for Ethan, her son from before, already tall and confident. My bedroom was quietly reassigned to a smaller space upstairs with sloped ceilings and one narrow window. Victoria called it, "Cozier for you, sweetie." I didn't fight. Fighting meant reminding them I was still there. At the rare dinners I was invited to, Dad would lean back and say things like, "Ethan understands the business. He sees the long game." Ethan would flash that easy smile, already wearing the future like it fit perfectly. I was the afterthought, the one with her own ideas. Ideas that made me difficult. Eventually, worthless. A rebel who refused the script. I stopped showing up. Stopped waiting for invitations that never came. I moved to Hartford, rented a one-bedroom with creaky floors and sunlight that actually reached the corners. I built a freelance Life Logos websites, small projects for people who paid on time and didn't ask about my last name. I paid my rent, fixed my own leaks. Drove a car with a dent I never fixed because survival came before vanity. It felt like freedom. But freedom doesn't silence the voice that whispers, "You're the reason everything went wrong." Lying in that hospital bed now, the monitors beeping their indifferent rhythm, I felt the weight of 16 years settle heavier than the cast on my wrist. All those apologies I'd swallowed. All the times I'd made myself smaller so they wouldn't have to look at me. All the holidays spent alone telling myself it was my fault for not being enough. And then the quiet realization crept in. Maybe the fault had never been mine. I reached for my phone. The screen was cracked from the crash, but it lit up. I opened the photos and found the one image I'd kept, the only one left of Mom. She was laughing in a park, holding me on her hip, her bracelet catching the sun. I traced her face with my thumb and whispered into the empty room, "Mom, how did you protect me?" The answer was waiting in that torn envelope I'd found weeks earlier, the one I'd almost thrown away. I hadn't looked closely then, but now with nothing else left, I knew I had to. The apartment in Hartford had become my quiet fortress. Third-floor walk-up in a red brick building from the 1920s, windows that caught the morning light just long enough to make the place feel alive. Rent came out of my account every first of the month, no cosigner, no family safety net. I liked that part. The certainty of it. Freelance graphic design kept the lights on. I built logos for neighborhood bakeries, websites for accountants who still printed invoices, branding for startups that dreamed big and paid small. The money came in waves. Good months meant new tires for the Subaru. Bad months meant rice and eggs for dinner. But every invoice paid was proof I could stand on my own. No one else's signature required. No one else's approval needed. I didn't go back to Simsbury often. The drive was short, the distance infinite. I'd send Dad a text on his birthday, simple, no questions attached. Happy birthday! Nothing came back, not even the three dots of someone typing. I told myself it was fine, cleaner this way. No forced smiles across a dining table set for people who didn't include me. A few weeks before everything shattered, I'd dragged an old cardboard box out from under the bed. Stuff from the house I'd taken when I left, yearbooks, a few sketchbooks, odds and ends. At the bottom, an envelope, one side torn, jagged. My name in Mom's handwriting on the front. Inside, nothing but the logo of some trust company I'd never heard of. No letter, no note. Just the envelope itself, like a promise half kept. I set it on the coffee table thinking I'd look later. Later never came. That night, I was finishing a last-minute revision for a client who wanted their bakery logo warmer but not too sweet. The kind of impossible brief that made me smile despite the deadline. I closed the laptop around midnight, drove the dark stretch back toward Hartford. The road was empty. The lights ahead turned red. I slowed. Then the box truck barreled through from the left. Impact. Glass exploding inward, metal folding, black. I woke in fragments, paramedics yelling, oxygen mask pressing cold against my face, the taste of copper. Then nothing again. When consciousness finally stuck, the room was too bright. The rolling tray table held a stack of papers, admission forms, insurance summaries, preliminary charges already climbing into the tens of thousands. My plan covered part. The rest was mine. $43,000 and change, a number that felt abstract until I realized it was real. Dad came once. I remember the doorway frame around him like a picture I couldn't unsee. Arms folded. Eyes on the machines, not on me. He stayed maybe 2 minutes. "This is going to cost a fortune," he said, voice flat as if reading from a report. Then he turned and walked out. No hand on my shoulder. No. "How are you feeling?" Just the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. Victoria had been there too long enough to sign the discharge of responsibility paperwork while I was still out. The nurse told me quietly, "She asked us to send all future bills directly to you." Efficient, detached. Exactly the kind of mercy you extend to a stranger you never liked. I lay there, left wrist in plaster, ribs bound so tight, breathing felt like asking permission. The life I'd built, the freelance hustle, the solitary evenings with takeout and Netflix, the small pride of never asking for help, suddenly looked like a house of cards in a windstorm. What was independence worth when the people who were supposed to at least pretend to care had already calculated the cost and decided it was too high? I kept thinking about Jacob, my younger brother, the one who'd always watched more than he spoke. The one who might still feel something under all the family pressure. Maybe he'd come. Maybe he'd heard and felt the pull. I reached for my phone with the hand that still worked, dialed his number. It rang once, sharp, mocking, then a flat recording. "This number is no longer in service or has been disconnected." Blocked. The word hit like a second crash. I stared at the screen until my vision swam. They had all decided. Dad, Victoria, Ethan, Jacob. That I was the liability. The expense not worth covering. The sister who could be erased without discussion. I let the phone fall to the sheet. My voice came out small, cracked, barely above a whisper. "They think I'm broken enough to deserve being left here to die." The hospital corridor lights dimmed after midnight, but sleep never came easy. I spent those hours tracing the same ceiling cracks with my eyes, replaying the silence like a tape that wouldn't stop. Every beep from the monitor felt like a reminder no one was coming. Victoria arrived the following afternoon. She moved down the hall with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly how much space she occupied. Cream cashmere coat draped over her shoulders, white tulips wrapped in cellophane, pristine, expensive, the sort of flowers that look better in a vase than in a sick room. She placed them beside the wilted carnations, then sat crossing her legs with deliberate grace. "Mackenzie, sweetie." she began, voice soft as velvet wrapped around steel. "You're looking better. We're all so relieved." The concern lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then her eyes sharpened. "Your father's deal is weeks away. It's everything he's worked toward. We cannot have complications." She pulled an envelope from her bag, thick legal looking, and slid it across the tray table. "This is a waiver. Sign it. Release any interest in family holdings. It's routine." I stared at the packet. Holdings. Dad always said Mom left debt. Nothing else. Victoria's smile tightened just a fraction. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sign and we move forward. Refuse?" She let the word hang, then leaned closer. "Your freelance client's dad has connections at every agency, every creative director in the region. One discreet call and the work dries up. No more projects. No more invoices. You understand, don't you?" The threat arrived wrapped in concern, delivered like a kindness. She stood, smoothed her coat, and added almost gently, "We're doing this for your growth, Mackenzie. Sometimes you have to hit bottom to learn how to stand." She left without looking back. The tulips stayed white and perfect, silently mocking the dead ones beside them. That evening, the phone started vibrating. Forwarded emails. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in a decade sent the chain. Dad's message had gone wide. Family, old friends, business associates. Subject, difficult family update. The body was brief, measured, lethal. Mackenzie has once again chosen her own path, refusing responsibility despite years of support. We've made the painful decision to step back. The worthless rebel must learn the consequences. Please keep her in your thoughts. No details. Just implication enough to let imagination fill in the worst. Within minutes, the texts followed. Old classmates, distant relatives, even a former neighbor. "Saw your dad's email. Are you okay? Heard things might be rough." Another, "Sorry your family has to deal with this. Hope you get the help you need." They didn't ask what happened. They didn't need to. Dad's version was clean, credible, complete. I was the problem child. The disappointment. The one who'd finally pushed too far. I read until my eyes stung. Each message landed like a fresh bruise. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to ache with every breath. They had taken my accident, my pain, my broken body, and turned it into their proof. Proof that I was broken long before the crash. Proof that walking away was justified. The humiliation didn't explode. It simmered. Slow. Deep. Turning from shame into something hotter, sharper. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had rewritten me for an audience, made me the cautionary tale at their dinner tables. The rebel who finally got what she deserved. I set the phone down. My good hand clenched the sheet until the knuckles whitened. For the first time since waking up, the guilt cracked open and let anger slip through. That night, as I lay counting ceiling tiles for the 1,000th time, the phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. Mackenzie. Jacob's voice, low, urgent, almost whispering. "It's me. Borrowed a phone. Dad monitors mine. I can't stay on long." He drew a shaky breath. "Mom left something for you. Something real. Dad was supposed to hand it over when you turned 25. He never did. I saw the documents once, bottom drawer locked. Trust company. He caught me. Grabbed my arm so hard it bruised. Said if I ever breathed a word, he'd cut me off for good." In the background, Victoria's heels echoed her voice calling his name. "I have to go. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." The call ended. I held the silent phone against my chest. My pulse hammered in my ears. They had hidden something. From me. For years. The silence after Jacob's call lasted exactly 2 minutes before my mind started racing. I replayed his words, low, hurried, almost panicked, like a tape stuck on loop. Something real. Supposed to be given at 25. Dad never did. Trust company. Bruised arm. Cut off for good. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The pieces didn't fit yet, but they were starting to press against each other in ways that hurt. If there was nothing, why the panic in his voice? If there was something, why the threat to keep it buried? The questions didn't just circle, they clawed. Morning came gray and slow. I opened my phone browser with the hand that still obeyed me. Typed variations of the logo fragment Jacob had described. Third search, Hartford Fiduciary Group. The crest matched navy gold serif letters that looked expensive even on a cracked screen. My thumb hovered over the number, then pressed call. The receptionist answered with the calm efficiency of someone who handled crises for a living. I gave my name. A pause. More typing. Then, Ms. Vaughn, please hold for Mr. Reynolds. Piano music on hold, soft, inoffensive, the sound people play when they don't want you to panic. 30 seconds. Then a voice, older, measured, the kind that had delivered bad news and good news in equal measure over decades. Ms. Vaughn, David Reynolds, managing trustee. We've been attempting to contact you for 3 years. 3 years. The room seemed to narrow. I gripped the rail until my knuckles ached. Contact me how? Certified letters. 3 separate mailings to the Simsbury address on record. Each receipt signed. No response from you. We assumed disinterest. Who signed? Papers rustled. Victoria Vaughn. All 3. The name hit like cold water on hot skin. Not a clerical error. Not Dad. Victoria. Every time. David's voice stayed even. Your mother created an irrevocable trust in 2008. You are the sole beneficiary. Terms activate at age 25. We've held administration pending your direction. Administration? A polite word for control. What exactly is in the trust? Investment portfolio, current valuation just over $2 million, conservatively managed. And the real property at Simsbury, deed recorded 2004 in your mother's name. Prenuptial agreement preserved it as separate. Upon her death, it entered the trust. Your father has occupied the residence since, but title has never passed to him. The house, the one I'd been told was his legacy, the one they'd remade without me. Not his, never his. And the letters. My voice sounded thin, distant. Certified receipts confirm receipt at the address. No forwarding attempted. That's a significant irregularity. Irregularity. A word that felt too small for what it covered. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Then a laugh, short, sharp, more surprise than humor. They told me she left debt. That Dad cleaned it up. That I was the reason she was gone. For 16 years. David paused long enough to let the weight settle. Your mother was exceptionally careful. She designed the trust precisely because she anticipated difficulties. Irrevocable means no one, not even your father, could alter or access it without your consent. Difficulties. A diplomatic way to say betrayal. The anger arrived then, not the hot flash of yesterday, but deeper, colder, more precise. They hadn't just left me in that bed. They had kept what was mine, hidden it behind locked drawers and signed receipts. Threatened Jacob to keep the secret. Turn my life into a story where I was the villain so they could stay the heroes. But beneath the anger, something else flickered, small, fragile, almost dangerous. Hope. Not the soft kind, the sharp kind. The kind that says maybe you weren't worthless after all. Maybe you were simply in the way of what they wanted to keep. 2 days later, 2 men in dark suits walked into the room. The older one, gray at the temples, calm eyes behind wire frames, extended a hand. David Reynolds. We spoke. The younger one, navy suit, small silver pin on the lapel, stood slightly behind. He looked at me, then let a slow, knowing smile curve his mouth. Your family just made a fatal mistake, he said quietly. They forgot who you really are. The 2 men didn't rush. David Reynolds set his briefcase down with the deliberate care of someone who knew the weight of what was inside. Michael Grant remained standing, hands in pockets, that quiet, almost amused smile still lingering, like a man who had watched too many secrets unravel and knew exactly how this one would end. David opened the case. The first document he placed on the tray table was thick, bound in cream cardstock, the edges crisp. "This is the trust instrument," he said. "Executed by your mother, Elizabeth Vaughn, October 14th, 2008. Irrevocable from the moment she signed. Sole beneficiary you." Her signature stared up at me, those familiar loops, the slight flourish on the final N. The same hand that had written "Draw what you feel" on post-it notes stuck to my sketchbooks. I touched the page. The paper felt warm, as if she had just set the pen down. Next came the deed. A single-sheet county seal in the corner. Recorded March 21st, 2004. Purchased with funds from your mother's separate inheritance. Prenuptial agreement preserved it as her property. Upon her death, it transferred into the trust. Your father has never held title. The Simsbury house. Stone walls. Iron gates. The pool that reflected stars on summer nights. The place where every hallway had been quietly scrubbed of her presence. The place they called home. Not his. Never his. Michael leaned in slightly, voice low. He's resided there 16 years. Used it as collateral for a development loan, current pledge value $4.8 million. The lender's documents show clear title in his name. That's not a clerical oversight. That's misrepresentation. Civil fraud, at minimum. Criminal referral possible if intent is proven. David continued, unflinching. The investment portfolio conservatively managed, no distributions, currently valued at $2,140,000. Growth has been steady, patient, waiting. $2,140,000. The number didn't land like money, it landed like evidence. Proof that every year I'd spent apologizing for existing had been built on a theft I never suspected. They had lived in her house, spent her money, built their empire on her foundation, and told me I was the debt. I felt the anger rise, not the frantic kind that burns out fast, but the deep, steady kind that rearranges bones. It didn't make me shake. It made me still. Very still. "They told me she left nothing," I said. "Debt. That Dad cleaned it up. That I owed them for breathing the same air." David met my eyes. "Your mother came to me before the marriage. She said very clearly, 'I want my daughter provided for regardless of what happens.'" She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. She knew. Knew. The word hung between us. Not speculation. Certainty. Mom had seen the shape of things to come and built a wall around me before the storm arrived. A wall no one, not Dad, not Victoria, not even time could breach. Michael's smile widened just enough to show teeth. "She built the shield. We're simply handing it to you." I looked at the documents again. Trust instrument. Deed. Certified mail receipts, Victoria's signature 3 times like signatures on a confession she never meant to write. Undeniable. Final. The anger didn't explode. It crystallized. Sharp. Clear. Useful. "What happens when the lender discovers the collateral isn't his?" David answered without hesitation. "Loan voids immediately, deal collapses. Their legal department will be involved within hours. The state attorney general may open a review for fraud. Your father will face financial penalties, professional damage, reputational consequences that could last years." Consequences. The word tasted like justice, not revenge. Justice. 16 years of silence, of shrinking, of carrying blame that wasn't mine, finally answered. I took a breath that reached all the way down. "I don't want this handled with letters or calls he can ignore. I want them to hear it from me. In the room where they feel untouchable. Where they stand up and announce deals built on what was never theirs." David studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "The announcement event is next week. Hartford Grand Ballroom. Investors, partners, local press. Your father is the keynote speaker. The image formed instantly, Dad at the podium, suit, pressed voice, confident, claiming legacy, claiming property, claiming victory. I gathered the documents, folded them with care, slid them into the folder Michael extended. As they turned to leave, David paused at the door. We'll prepare the formal notices. You choose the moment. The door closed softly. I looked down at the folder in my lap. Heavy, solid, real. They had called me worthless for so long that I'd almost believed it. Now they would learn exactly how much I was worth. The Hartford Grand Ballroom was lit like a stage set for triumph. Chandeliers spilled warm gold across linen-covered tables. Black tie guests leaned into conversations about square footage and closing dates. Waiters glided with trays of champagne that cost more per glass than my monthly rent. 200 people who measured legacy in deeds and dollars. Dad stood at the podium beneath a navy banner, Vaughn Development Foundations for Tomorrow. He wore the Brioni suit like armor, voice smooth, and practiced as he spoke a vision of family of enduring strength. This property represents more than land, he said, gesturing with open palms. It represents history, commitment, the unbreakable foundation we've built together. Applause rose polite at first, then fuller cameras flashing from the press table. He smiled the smile of a man who had never once doubted the room was his. I entered from the side door at 8:45, precisely when the program promised the Q&A. David Reynolds walked to my left, briefcase steady. Michael Grant to my right, silver pin catching light. I wore a plain black dress that covered the cast on my left wrist and the tape around my ribs. No jewelry except Mom's thin silver bracelet. Every step sent a small protest through my body. Every step also reminded me I was no longer lying down. Heads turned as we moved forward. Whispers followed like ripples. A woman near the aisle murmured, "Isn't that his daughter?" A man replied, "The one from the email." Dad saw me mid-sentence. His words faltered for the briefest instant. The mic caught the tiny catch in his throat. The smile stayed, but the eyes flickered. Victoria sat front row in emerald silk diamonds at her ears. Her face lost color in stages, first pale, then ashen, like someone had pulled a plug. Ethan beside her stared at his napkin as if it held escape instructions. Jacob at the VIP table kept his gaze fixed on the tablecloth, hands, flat shoulders locked. Dad stepped down from the podium, champagne still in hand, voice projected for the room. "Mackenzie, this is unexpected. I didn't think you'd be well enough." "I'm well enough," I said loud enough for every table to hear. "More than you counted on." The ballroom fell silent. Even the quartet's strings seemed to hesitate. Dad's smile tightened at the edges. "This isn't the place. Let's step into the hallway." "No." The word cut clean. "You've had 16 years for hallways. You left me a note while I was unconscious. You signed away my care. You sent emails rewriting my life for everyone you know. So we do this here, in the room where you feel invincible." David stepped forward, unbuttoned his jacket with calm precision. "Good evening. David Reynolds, managing trustee of the Elizabeth Vaughn Irrevocable Trust, established 2008. My client, Mackenzie Vaughn, is the sole beneficiary." He placed the briefcase on the nearest table between a bread plate and a crystal water glass, and laid out the documents in a neat row. Trust instrument signed by Elizabeth Vaughn. Deed to the Simsbury residence recorded 2004 prior to marriage. Prenuptial agreement preserved it as separate property. Upon death, transferred to the trust. And these. He indicated the receipts, certified mail confirmations to Simsbury. Signed by Victoria Vaughn 3 times. The room held its breath. Ice shifted in glasses. Phones appeared beneath tables. Dad's composure cracked just a hairline fracture. "This is ridiculous. My late wife had no trust. Whatever narrative you've been fed." David's voice remained even. The lender, First Regional Capital, received documentation asserting clear title to the Simsbury property as collateral for a $4.8 million development loan. That title does not exist in your name, Mr. Vaughn. It never did. A tall man in charcoal rose from a front table, the bank representative. He adjusted his cuffs with deliberate calm. If the pledged collateral is held in irrevocable trust and was never legally yours to offer, the transaction is void. Effective immediately. Our legal department will be in touch Monday morning. Dad's mouth opened. No sound emerged. Victoria stood so fast her chair scraped. Her voice broke raw across the silence. You told me the house was clear. You said the papers were handled. You told me to sign those letters, old mail, nothing important. Dad turned to her low and urgent. Victoria, stop. But the room had heard. 200 people had heard the panic, heard the admission, heard the complicity. The bankman spoke once more, tone flat as granite. The deal is suspended. Good night. He gathered his coat and walked out. No flourish, just departure. Dad looked at the documents. At David. At me. For the first time in my life, I saw something real behind his eyes. Not control, not dismissal, not even anger. Fear. Naked, unguarded fear. Jacob sat motionless at the VIP table, head bowed, hands pressed flat to the cloth. He didn't lift his gaze, didn't speak, didn't move toward me. No one did. No aunt, no cousin, no old family friend stepped forward. The room exhaled in murmurs, low at first, then spreading like fire through dry leaves. Phones stayed out. Whispers turned to quiet conversations. I looked at Dad one final time. The man who had blamed a child for a storm. The man who had occupied her house, spent her money, built his name on her ground, and called me worthless when the cost became inconvenient. I didn't need another word. I turned. David and Michael fell in beside me. We walked back through the same side entrance, past waiters paused mid-stride, past tables where forks still hovered over untouched plates. Behind me, I felt Dad's gaze follow. Not with rage, not with denial, with the kind of fear a man feels when the foundation he stood on turns out to have been someone else's all along. The fallout arrived in waves, quiet at first, then relentless, like water wearing down stone. The trust transfer cleared in record time. Irrevocable provisions left no room for delay. By mid-June, the assets were mine, $2,140,000 in liquid funds and unencumbered title to the Simsbury property. I issued the eviction notice through council. 30 days. Connecticut statute. No grace period. No appeal. The development loan collapsed the following business day. First Regional Capital didn't hesitate. They forwarded the file to the Connecticut Attorney General's office with a formal complaint of mortgage fraud and material misrepresentation. The inquiry began discreetly, subpoenas for documents, interviews with former partners. Then it widened. Lenders pulled lines of credit. Suppliers demanded cash up front. The company, once synonymous with his name, began shedding staff and contracts. Reputation in real estate is everything. His had fractured publicly, and fractures spread. Victoria filed for divorce 17 days after the ballroom. Papers cited irreconcilable differences. The timing was eloquent. When the financial tide receded, so did her commitment. She left with what the prenup allowed, nothing more. No drawn-out battles over assets that no longer existed. No public tears. Just a swift exit from a structure that had lost its foundation. Ethan's promised role evaporated overnight. The heir apparent found himself competing for entry-level positions at firms he'd once dismissed. Last I heard, through a mutual contact, he was still sending resumes. The golden child learned what it felt like to stand in line. Jacob remained absent. Not a message. Not a call. Not even an indirect word through a distant relative. His silence was complete. He had chosen safety over truth long ago, and he stayed with that choice. I released any hope of change. I sold the Simsbury house in late July. Cash buyer, no contingencies, closing in 30 days. I never returned for a final look. The realtor managed everything. The check arrived clean and electronic. I deposited it without fanfare. The new apartment in West Hartford was modest, but open second floor, large windows, morning sun that filled the rooms without asking permission. I furnished it slowly, a simple couch, a desk by the window for my work shelves, for books I'd never had room for before. No hurry, no inherited preferences, just what I decided. I hung Mom's photo on the living room wall, the one of her laughing in open light holding me close, her silver bracelet catching sun. I looked at it every morning while coffee brewed. No burden of guilt. No need to explain my existence. Just quiet recognition she had seen me. She had planned for me. She had believed in me when belief was scarce. Freelance work continued. Clients returned, some expanded their projects after the story circulated quietly in professional circles. Turns out, people respect someone who stands without needing their nod. The work felt lighter, more honest. It belonged to me alone. I made no attempt to reach the family, no holiday messages, no courtesy texts, no disguised olive branches. The line was drawn, permanent. They didn't cross it. I didn't invite them to. Sometimes I wondered what Dad felt in an emptied Simsbury house, echoes where voices used to be silence, where life once overlapped. Whether Victoria missed the security she had traded for loyalty. Whether Ethan regretted the pedestal that had vanished beneath him. Whether Jacob ever questioned the cost of his silence. The wondering passed quickly. I no longer had space for it. You are not the label they pinned on you in anger. You are not the debt they said you owed. You are not the rebel they required to justify their own comfort. Sometimes the truest act of self-respect is to walk away without a backward glance, to stop apologizing for taking up space, to stop waiting for a welcome that was never sincere, to breathe, deeply, freely, without asking anyone's permission. If you've carried blame that belonged to someone else, if you've been erased by the very people who should have cherished you, hear this: your worth was never theirs to define. It was always yours. And sometimes the only way to claim it is to leave the table entirely. Thank you for staying until the end.